nice to see you all. Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Evanston. Whether this is your spiritual home or you are newly discovering this community, we are so grateful that you are with us. We are an inclusive and welcoming community seeking truth in love and striving to nurture this human spirit for a world made whole. We are guided by our principles and our values, which remind us in every moment and through every challenge that each of us is worthy of love and that we are all connected through the vast and beautiful web of existence. We come together to remember our kinship with one another and to hold one another in heart and mind with tenderness and careful attention. There are many links of connection in the description below the YouTube live stream for those of you who are joining us online. And these include the order of service credits, ways to support our mission, and to be added to our email newsletter list. If you're here in the sanctuary today, we encourage you to use the QR code, which is found on the hymnal carts just outside the door there, for a digital order of service, or you can take one of our large print orders of service that we have at the table near the sanctuary doors. There are also listening assistance devices there and hymnals, both of our hymnals available for anyone to use. One major announcement, which you're going to hear repeatedly because I want to make sure everybody gets it, that beginning September 4th, our Sunday schedule is going to shift a little bit. I know this is hard to read, but this is kind of just to give you a visual cue that this is in the newsletter and on our website. The worship service time will shift to 10:30, and before worship, we'll have faith formation classes starting around 9:30. Choir rehearsal will start, I think, a little bit before 9 o'clock, and other support groups that are currently meeting before the service now, the cancer care group in particular. Children will be in the sanctuary for the first 30 minutes of our worship service, and then they'll go to their age-based groups at 11 o'clock until noon. And then kinship time will be after the worship service from 11:30 to 12:30. So it's this stagger schedule. All of these details, like I said, are in the newsletter and on the homepage of our website. So please check there, and don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions or concerns, or address those to Reverend Susan or Kathy Underwood. And now let us settle into our shared time of reflection, celebration, and inspiration. As we begin our worship service, those joining us online are invited to gather your chalice as we join in beloved community. Welcome to worship. The Unitarian Church of Evanston resides on the traditional homelands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. In 1829, this land was recorded as being transferred from the local Potawatomi community, who had no choice but to sell their land to the U.S. government before being forcefully removed west of the Mississippi River. This land was then sold to white settlers. The Chicagoland area is now home to one of the largest and most diverse urban Native communities in the U.S. This acknowledgement of the land's history is one small effort toward building long-term solidarity with contemporary Indigenous communities. We name these realities with honor for all the ancestors and with respect for our descendants, with gratitude for the animals and plants sustained by this land, and with deep appreciation for the land we use as sacred space. As Lee and Linda light our chalice today, symbol of our living tradition, I invite you to join in saying these words by Deborah Falk. The chalice lit among us is a beacon of hope in a world in crisis, a beacon of possibility made manifest in community, a beacon of warmth through our interconnections, a beacon of light illuminating our shared wisdom, a beacon of connection by our being together. Please rise in body or spirit and join in saying the words of our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Before we sing our opening hymn, and then I invite you to stay risen for us to sing our hymn. But before we do that, let's turn to one another and say good morning in our practice of radical hospitality, and check in on the live stream if you haven't done so already. Our hymn is number 299, Make Channels for the Streams of Love.
Well, good morning, everyone. Today's Time for All Ages comes from a volume of stories published by our UUA's Beacon Press in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s about two children named Martin and Judy. At the time, these stories were unique in the way they approached such topics as God and the mysteries of the universe. As we read this story today, we recognize that there are many things we know now that we didn't know then, even as wonder, awe, and mystery continue. These stories, which were important and groundbreaking for their time, were limited in the perspectives and lives they represented. So as we listen to the story today, we can name the lack of inclusion and commit to doing better. The title of our story is called Out Under the Stars by Verna Hills Bailey. There we go. I should ask, do any of you recognize this book besides Linda? Oh, a few of you, great. The fire on the beach snapped and crackled. The meat cakes sizzled in the pan. There was a good smell of supper cooking. Martin was happy to be here at the lake with his family, miles away from the house beside Judy's house. He heard the sound of waves lapping the shore and of birds in the woods. He hoped it would not rain once they stayed here for a whole week of his father's vacation. He took up a handful of sand and let it sift through his fingers. It felt warm, and the tiny grains sparkled in the sunshine. Martin spread some of the sand over his hand and began counting the grains. He counted 10, 20, 30, and still he had scarcely counted a teaspoon of sand. He began wondering, how many grains of sand were there in a handful? How many grains of sand in a pailful? How many grains of sand on the whole beach? Nobody knew what Martin was thinking about those millions and millions of grains of sand. Everybody else was busy getting supper ready. He was sure that supper cooked over the fireplace on the shore would taste better than any supper at home ever did. And it did taste wonderfully good. After supper, the sky began to grow rosy with the sunset. It made Martin think of something. I wish we could sit right here until the stars come out. Oh, could we, Daddy? Said Barbara, please. It will be very late before it gets dark enough to see the stars, said Martin's father. But I think it would be fun to stay up this one night. What do you say, Mother? Mother nodded her head. It's a fine idea. As soon as the picnic things were cleared away, Martin and Barbara brought out sweaters and blankets, and then for a little while the family lay quietly by the lake, watching the colors fade from the sky. The birds in the woods grew still. Slowly, slowly, the darkness came. Martin wanted to be the one to see the first star, but he and Barbara saw it at the same time. Then they saw a second star and a third. Before very long, it seemed as if there were millions of stars in the sky. Martin began wondering again. There were so many, many stars. Could anyone count them all? Daddy, where did so many stars come from? I mean, in the very beginning, how did they all get made? I've wondered a good deal about that myself. It's a big question. I can't answer it, and no one else can yet. Well, what do people think? Asked Martin. Scientists who have studied the stars a great deal say there are several ways they might have been made. Some think that in the beginning there was just whirling gases. But where did the gases come from? Asked Martin. Martin's mother spoke. As Daddy said, no one really knows yet. And people don't think the same way about it. Many people would say that in the beginning, God made everything. Oh, said Martin, that couldn't be. Because who made God? And where did God get the things to make everything with? Some people would answer that this way, said Martin's father. God is whatever was at the very beginning and causes things to be as they are. But other people would not explain it at all that way. Martin looked up at the stars still shining brightly. He reached for a handful of sand and let it sift through his fingers. Don't you like to feel these tiny grains of sand, Martin? Mother, I should say. I do, and there are as many stars in the sky as there are grains of sand in the world. Martin's mother gave him a big hug. Another hard question, Martin, as she lifted Peter from his pen, who was sound asleep. Big, faraway things like stars are wonderful, and tiny, close things like grains of sand are wonderful. And now we must go to bed so that we'll feel like waking up when our star shines on us in the morning. Our star? Asked Martin. Which one is our star? I know, said Barbara, the sun. And we can call it our star because it's the one that is nearest us and keeps us warm. Martin liked calling the sun our star. He looked up once more at the other, farther away stars. Then he walked close beside his father through the darkness on the way to bed. The end. It's fun to find that. Kathy found that book in our 3 of the volumes in our room downstairs, and it was kind of fun to share that bit of history. This is the time in our service when we hold space for the joys and sorrows of those gathered here, honoring the struggles and the triumphs, the brokenness and the wholeness that is woven into the human experience. If you have a joy or a sorrow that you'd like spoken aloud, you can write it in the Joys and Sorrows book at the back table, or you can submit it through the Google form found on our homepage of our website, or simply send me or Reverend Susan an email. If you enter a joy or a sorrow into the live stream chat, it'll be shared with the community through our Realm database. These are the joys and sorrows that have been shared today. Amy Staton shares this sorrow for Dorothy Staton, her father's wife. She is in her 80s, living in a residential nursing home in Phoenix, Arizona. She's been struggling with dialysis and cancer for the past several years. Gretchen Brewster is feeling great joy and blessedness that her loving cat, Blaze, there he is, an 8-year-old handsome tabby and a decided pro-choice supporter, Gretchen writes, has chosen life. Blaze experienced severe diabetic chaos 4 weeks ago, a near-death experience, but with superb medical treatment, plus Gretchen's finally achieving her goal of becoming a veterinary assistant, along with the prayers and well wishes of many, Blaze has now entered into what is probably his 5th life. Good to hear. From Kathy Underwood, thank you to all of you for your caring words about my daughter, Delaney. She has been released from the inpatient program due to insurance not letting her stay longer. My joy is that we were able to spend time with her on her birthday last week. From Ellie Feddersen, along with Bonnie, my best friend of 50 years since middle school, I am mourning the loss of her husband, Jerry Williams. He died after struggling with stage 4 prostate cancer for 6 years.
His family was with him, and as he passed peacefully, it is so sad and hurts so much. I mourn with and for my friend. A sorrow from Norman Field. July has been a difficult month. I got a call from a Florida police department about 3 weeks ago stating that my sister had chosen to end her life without a will. I struggle to deal with her estate. I've been to her residence once already and will have to return again. About the only bright spot is my friend Cindy, who's with us today. Welcome, Cindy, who was an estate specialist for decades before retiring. Without her, my unpleasant tasks would be truly an ordeal. And finally, from Heike Eckhart, who was our guest preacher last week, a sorrow. It is with a very heavy heart that I share the news that my mom passed away on July 22nd. While she had been dealing with a number of health challenges over the past few years, this was somewhat unexpected. I'm on my way home to Germany to be with my friends at this difficult time. A joy. It was wonderful to be in the pulpit guest at UC last Sunday. I'm deeply grateful for the warm welcome and kind words I received. And you are not imagining it. Yes, Heike did preach 2 days after her mother died. And I know that was a challenge, but a challenge she wanted to follow through on. So my heart is with her. And with all of you, with all that we're carrying, all that all of us are carrying on our hearts. This sacred space is for our tender offerings, and it is part of the practice of beloved community. Together we expand our celebrations and we lessen the burden of our grief. I invite you now to come forward if you have a joy or a sorrow on your heart that you would like to express by lighting a candle. And if you would like me to bring a candle to you, please raise your hand. Yesterday in our worship planning play date, a wonderful suggestion was made that after we share our joys and sorrows and take them in, that those expressed verbally, those expressed through candlelighting, and those that are just on our hearts and are too tender to share, that we say together these words: for these joys we give our thanks, for these sorrows we give our love. So let's say that together. For these joys we give our thanks, for these sorrows we give our love. And now will you please join me in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life, source of love, beautiful mystery. We are grateful for this time together to hold each other in care and in community amidst the many struggles and challenges we face. We acknowledge that each of us is carrying different burdens and heartbreaks and all manner of stress and trauma. We breathe in together, knowing that our breath connects us to each other and to all life. Through our breath, we can return to this moment of healing and renewal. Breathe in, breathe out. Be here now. Be in this moment of belonging to one another. Be here in this space and time, dissolving all differences and distances. Be here together. Together we are stronger. Together we can be more loving and kind. Together we can understand so much more, create so much more possibility. Beloveds, may we continue to turn to one another, though the forces of ignorance and fear may try to pull us away. Let us turn again and again toward one another with love and with faith that there is always more possible than we could possibly know. With faith in the power of love, may we have courage and strength to carry on, striving to bring more joy, beauty, and healing to the world. Amen. As we say in our covenant, each Sunday, service is our law. UCE is called by our mission, values, and principles to contribute to the community, to form accountable partnerships, and to express gratitude through giving. Today's offering will be shared with Mother and Child Alliance, which provides comprehensive support to pregnant women and their families before and up to 24 months after delivery. Prenatal and postpartum services ensure no babies are born with life-threatening and costly preventable diseases in Illinois. If you are joining us from home or in the building, you may text to give, mail in a check, or give from our website. If you write a check, please indicate in the memo line if your check is for the shared offering, for your pledge, for your capital campaign payment, or some other form of giving. And if you are in the sanctuary, the ushers will pass the collection bowls down the aisles. Please give as generously as you are able, and may what you give bring you joy. Selections today, Gregory. The reading today is Map of the Journey in Progress by retired UU minister Victoria Safford. Here is where I found my voice and chose to be brave. Here's a place where I forgave someone against my better judgment, and I survived that. And unexpectedly, amazingly, I became wiser. Here's where I was once forgiven, was ready for once in my life to receive forgiveness and to be transformed. And I survived that also. I lived to tell the tale. This is the place where I said no, more loudly than I thought I ever could. And everybody stared, but I said no loudly anyway, because I knew it must be said. And those staring settled down into harmless, ineffective grumbling, and over me, they had no more power anymore. Here's a time, and here's another, where when I laid down my fear and walked right on into it, right up to my neck into that roiling water. Here's where cruelty taught me something. And here's where I was first astonished by gratuitous compassion and knew it for the miracle it was, the requirement it is. It was a trembling time. And here, much later, is where I returned the blessing clumsily. It wasn't hard, but I was unaccustomed. It cycled round, and as best I could, I sent it back on out, passed the gift along. This circular motion around and around has no apparent end. Here's a place, a murky puddle, where I have stumbled more than once and fallen. I don't know yet what to learn there. On this site, I was outraged, and the rage sustains me still. It clarifies my seeing. And here's where something caught me, a warm breeze in late winter, birdsong in late summer. Here's where I was told that something was wrong with my eyes, that I see the world strangely. And here's where I said, yes, I know. I walk in beauty. Here is where I began to look with my own eyes and listen with my ears and sing my own song, shaky as it is. Here is where, if by a surgeon's knife, my heart was opened up. And here, and here, and here. These are the landmarks of conversion. Last week we heard from Heike about the challenges and importance of articulating our shared faith. She talked about translating our UU beliefs into a language that others can understand. Unitarian Universalists often struggle with speaking about our religious tradition because some of us have been repelled or harmed by proselytizing throughout our lives. We fear sometimes that we'll do the same if we share who we are, what we believe, and why we find this faith community worthy of our attention. Sometimes we shy so far away from proselytizing that we not only forget to share our good news, we forget that any good news exists. In our reliance on reason and humanist search for truth and meaning, it can be easy to get lost in despair. And despair is understandable. In the midst of environmental and societal collapse, we need communities of faith like ours more than ever to provide support and inspiration and encouragement to help us live our values and to imagine the possibilities. We need to be able to articulate our faith to remind one another of the value of life and the beauty and wonder woven into this experience of living. We need to share our stories of the journey so that we can be in deeper relationship with each other and all those beyond our walls who are also working to make the world whole. Today is the first in what we hope will be an ongoing series of UCE members sharing their spiritual journeys. In the words of author and religious environmentalist Robert S. Gottlieb, spirituality is a fundamental commitment to a form of life that downplays the conventional ego's focus on its goals and desires, and instead cultivates such virtues as compassion, love, and gratitude. I am grateful to Lee Bannor and Linda LaPlante, two of our longest serving members, for beginning this series and for sharing their stories today. We begin with Lee.
Good morning. I started coming to the Unitarian Church of Evanston when I was 4 or 5 years old. My parents were unchurched before that. They were from different backgrounds. My mother's parents were from the South, Alabama and Georgia. And to my knowledge, my grandparents had traditional religious views when they were young. However, a University of Chicago education and progressing years modified their feelings. Mom once told me that she asked her mother if she thought Jesus was divine, and grandmother replied, "Aren't we all?" My father's parents were immigrants. His father was a Russian Jew who, as a pharmacy student at the University of Moscow, escaped from the Tsar's secret police and eventually made his way to Chicago. Grandpa was a firm believer that religion was the opiate of the people. He claimed that he refused to attend his own bar mitzvah. My grandmother, who I never met, was from Trondheim, Norway, ja, sure, Hanna Halverson. And Dad said that he had no recollection of religion ever being discussed when he was growing up. One time, we went to visit a high school friend of my mother who lived in Madison, Wisconsin. They were members of the Unitarian Church there. The Frank Lloyd Wright Church was only about a year old at that time. We went with them on Sunday morning, and my parents were so impressed that when we returned to Chicago, they sought out a Unitarian church and landed here at UCE. Homer Jack was the minister at the time. I don't know how many of you actually know much about Homer Jack. He was a star. He was actually a friend of Albert Schweitzer and visited him in Africa every year. And so my parents became big fans, and I was in Sunday school with Homer's son. The church at that time was on Chicago Avenue next to the Presbyterian Church. When we built this building, we hoped to sell that building to a smaller congregation, but with no luck, and the Presbyterian Church bought it and tore it down, and that's where their parking lot is. pave paradise and put up a parking lot. So anyway, one of the few things remaining from the old church is that stained glass panel that you see hanging behind the choir there. And I can tell you some interesting history about that church. When we moved into this building, we started the service in the old building, and we processed to this building. And of course, in good Unitarian fashion, the person leading the procession was carrying the coffee pot. Now, I was involved in an amusing incident in the old church. It didn't have space for a Sunday school, one of the reasons why we moved. And so we were renting space in the public school at Dempster and Hinman. And after school, we would walk over to the church on Chicago Avenue. Well, one Sunday morning, there was a miscue or something, and we wound up at the church too early. And so they had a bunch of rambunctious kids packed into a rather small lobby. Well, one of us noticed that there was a stairway leading up to somewhere, we didn't know where, but we, being adventurous, went up the stairway, and it was an attic. And in the attic, there was an old floor model Victrola with the big bell and all. And my friends didn't know what it was, but I had visited my great-grandmother in Georgia just a couple years earlier, and she had one that she was still using, so I knew what it was. I took a record out of the shelf, put it on, cranked it up, and put the needle on the record. And I remember exactly what the song was. When whippoorwills call and evening is nigh, I hurry to my blue heaven. Thank you, back up. Well, somebody came running up the stairs. Turn it off, because it could be heard very loudly down in the sanctuary. Now, sometime later, when I was in the high school club here, our next minister, Ross Weston, came and talked to us, and he suggested that some of us might consider going into the ministry. A little light went on in my head, and I said, that's what I want to do with my life. Now, in 1961, there was a conference here in Chicago between the Unitarians and the Universalists, and I was a page at that conference. I passed out flyers and reprinted resolutions and all that. And so that was when the Unitarians and Universalists became Unitarian Universalist. Then, when I was a senior in college, I applied to Meadville Lombard Theological School. I had an interview, but I was advised that they discourage people from starting at Meadville immediately after finishing college. They said that you really need to get out and get some experience, several years of experience before that. So when I graduated from college, I joined the Peace Corps. And then when I got out of the Peace Corps, a friend of mine invited me to go with him to campaign for Eugene McCarthy, the peace candidate running against Lyndon Johnson in the Democratic primary. Well, I did a lot of door-to-door canvassing, and the political bug bit me. I campaigned for a state legislative candidate in Chicago in 1970, a mayoral campaign candidate in 1971, and then another legislative candidate in 1972. Joe Lundy, some of you folks who were around for a while might remember, and that was the first campaign I worked in that won. In 1973, I was campaigning for an aldermanic candidate in the 50th Ward of Chicago, and one day in the campaign office, I was introduced to a young lady by the name of Jane Dillinger. Was introduced by Woody Bowman, who later became another one of our state representatives. Jane and I were married here at UCE in April of 1974 by then Reverend Charles Edis. And when I write my autobiography, of course, I'm going to call it I Married Dillinger's Daughter. After 10 years of marriage, Jane decided to quit her job and work on a master's degree. As she was getting close to completing her degree, she told me that I ought to think about going back to school. That little light went on in my head again, and I said, I remember what I was going to do. So I applied to Meadville Lombard, and this time I was accepted. But life had other plans. There's a song idea for you, Kristen. Anyway, the same week I was accepted at Meadville, we found out that after 12 years of marriage, we were going to become parents. And I started part-time at Meadville while we had an infant at home. And I figured that when Catherine was a little older, Jane would go out and get a job and I could finish at Meadville. However, Jane had difficulty finding a job, and after a couple of years part-time at Meadville, I had taken all of the classes I could possibly take part-time, and money was getting a little short, so I had to discontinue. Nonetheless, I am so glad for my studies at Meadville, especially my comparative religion class. As a result, I have read the Bible in its entirety, the Tao Te Ching, the Lotus Sutra, the Bhagavad Gita, and 2 translations of the Quran. For myself, the one that most closely matches where I am now is the Tao Te Ching. The opening words are, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao." In my heart, that means embrace the mystery. What does it mean to embrace the mystery? It means being comfortable with not knowing. It means having an open mind to all possibilities. It means being very accepting of other people's ideas and opinions as they relate to the realities of existence. Now, at age 77, I'm becoming more aware of my mortality. Nonetheless, I look forward to the future, still embracing the mystery and unafraid of death.
Good morning. Well, shortly after I was born, my parents moved out of the city of Cleveland to North Olmsted, Ohio, which was just west of Cleveland, where a high school friend of my father's was a member of the First Universalist Church of North Olmsted. Much later, I learned that there were many small Universalist churches in that part of the country, a couple of which were actually ministered to by the Reverend David Bumbaugh, before he went to seminary. Old-timers here at the Evanston Church will remember that David was later a beloved interim minister of this church. My parents joined that community and soon became very regular members. I cannot remember a single Sunday in my childhood when we did not go to church. The old church building dated from the mid-19th century and featured a steeple with a real bell, often rung by my father with a coarse old rope, which I would often grasp and ride up and down as he rang the bell to announce that the service was beginning. My father also sang bass in the choir and often played his violin in the service. And my mother was usually teaching Sunday school. The church met an important need for my parents, who both came from unchurched families but craved a caring community. The rational interpretation of the Bible and other literature that they heard there fed their souls. In my Sunday school class, there were nearly always stories like the one Kathy read this morning. And later, as I grew older, we would visit churches and places of worship for other faiths in the larger community. When I was a teenager, I sang in the choir with my father. As far as theology during that time, I remember quite a bit of Khalil Gibran. It was plain language that I could understand. And I remember a particular Sunday when I was sitting in the service, letting the words just wash over me, and I heard the phrase, "God is love." I remember thinking to myself, you know, that just about covers everything. I believe I was 11 or 12 at the time. I met my husband, John, during the summer before our senior years in college. And as we got acquainted and eventually decided to get married and planned a wedding, he became really interested in this unusual church that I belonged to. And that established us in a routine a lot like the one that I had grown up with. We always went to church on Sunday. While he made his way through his ROTC Air Force commitment, wherever we moved, we always found a UU church, and there were always interesting things to learn about in the various communities. By that time, Universalism had become Unitarian Universalism. And I also attended the General Assembly that Lee referred to when he was a page, where merger took place. I was living in Massachusetts at the time, and my mother was living in Ohio, where I had grown up, and we both traveled to Chicago to the GA that year. I remember that she was rather dubious about the merger because she believed that the better educated and more well-heeled Unitarians were going to entirely take over the more rural and working class Universalists. I'll let you all think about that and decide how you think it worked out. During my young married and parenting years, church was mainly a place I made friends and built skills. John and I settled in with a lay-led group which met in Old Town here in Chicago. It was called the Near North UU Fellowship. And our home phone became the number that was published for the fellowship. Among other things, I learned to field the calls that asked, just what is it that your group believes? One noteworthy event I remember from that time was when we were seeking a new meeting place for our Sunday services. I was the board chair at the time, and our ministerial student intern and I were invited to the board meeting of the Midwest Buddhist Temple. They had just built themselves a new building, and we were seeking to rent their old facilities. This group of Japanese American men greeted us really warmly and told us they would be particularly pleased to rent to us because many of their families had sought refuge here in Chicago to avoid internment during the Second World War, and they were helped and supported by a group of Unitarians. We were very proud to learn that. As my children grew older and we felt the need of a strong Sunday school, we looked to the north and joined the Unitarian Church of Evanston. That was 1977, and it's just overwhelming to remember all that I have done within these walls during this period of time. I have served on the board of trustees and chaired it twice, served on 2 different ministerial search committees, been employed here as church administrator for a few years. I've participated in fundraising, taught preschoolers and middle schoolers, greeted many, many visitors, and sat often in these very chairs, usually without the cushions, looking out at these trees that are now behind me. I've suffered losses and been consoled here. I've celebrated successes and been cheered in this space. Over the years, I learned about Indian culture from Abi Janamanchi when he was with us during his Meadville years. I gained an appreciation for Islam from Irv Bader, who led a class 3 Tuesday nights, as well as learning from so many different folks whom I've met here, right up to last Sunday when Heike talked about faith fluency. What an interesting idea. Much of it has built on that early sense that I had as just a kid about the importance of love. And now the journey continues. Thank you.
Thank you to Lee and Linda for sharing your stories. As we extinguish the chalice, please join in saying these words by the Reverend Elizabeth Sell Jones. Though the flame is extinguished, we carry with us the warmth of community, the light of truth, and the fire of commitment until we are together again. Please rise and join in singing hymn 1020, Woyaya.
Maria.
May each of us be blessed in the ongoing journey of the Spirit with curiosity, courage, and openness. May we journey together with mutual care and friendship. Let us go making peace and justice along the way.